This lecture is on the Swiss Reformation, and this lecture is for the church history class at East Asia School of Theology in Singapore. The Swiss Reformation is largely centered around the life of one man, Ulrich Zwingli. Ulrich Zwingli was born on January 1st, 1484 in Switzerland. So Zwingli grew up in Switzerland, and he had a deep love for his homeland. He later attended the University of Vienna, and then he transferred to the University of Basel, and he graduated with a Master of Arts from the University of Basel in 1506. And during his college years, Ulrich Zwingli was influenced by Renaissance humanism, and you will see some of that influence affect him later in his career. After graduating from the University of Basel, Ulrich Zwingli was sent to be a parish priest in the town of Glarus, Switzerland. And this is a picture that shows you Glarus, Switzerland. Now, this picture is of the modern day town of Glarus, but you can still see the mountains and get some idea of what this setting is like. Now, while he was a parish priest in Glarus, Zwingli took his job as parish priest seriously. And so because he took his job seriously, he began to study the Bible seriously. And he also, as he read the Bible and as he studied the Bible, he also became influenced by Erasmus, who was one of the Renaissance humanists. Now, Zwingli's study of the personal study of the Bible was unusual at this time because most parish priests in Switzerland were not very educated, or at the very least, they were not very knowledgeable about biblical teaching. Now, at this time, one of the things Switzerland was known for was sending mercenaries to fight in the wars of other countries. And these mercenaries would be basically hired out to other countries to help fight their wars. Now, Ulrich Zwingli became a chaplain, and he went with one of these mercenary armies to fight in a couple of Italian campaigns. And the first campaign he was involved in was in 1512. And in that campaign, his Swiss army was victorious, but he did see some of his Swiss countrymen burning homes, pillaging homes, raping women, and doing all kinds of terrible things that go along with war. Then Zwingli's second Italian campaign with Swiss mercenaries occurred in 1515. And this time, the Swiss mercenary army that he was with suffered a great defeat. And so he as a result of both of these campaigns, he was on both sides of battle. He was able to experience what victory felt like and what defeat felt like in war. But after the defeat in 1515, Zwingli began to reevaluate whether it was proper for mercenaries to fight in the wars of other nations. And as a result of this reassessment, he came to the conclusion that no, it was wrong for mercenaries to fight in the wars of other nations. And in fact, he came to the conviction that mercenaries were one of the great evils in Switzerland in his day, because he said that they were trading blood for gold. However, he did not become a pacifist because of this experience, and we will see that played out later in his life. So in 1518, Ulrich Zwingli was transferred to Zurich. By this time, Zwingli's religious views were very similar to Martin Luther's religious views. However, Zwingli's path to his Protestant conviction was very different from the path that Martin Luther took. Martin Luther came to reach his conviction as a result of personal experiences, especially through a series of traumatic personal experiences. But Ulrich Zwingli, on the other hand, he reached his Protestant beliefs as a result of his Renaissance humanist studies. And so this was a very different path that Zwingli took towards reaching these conclusions. So once Zwingli became convinced of the same truths that Martin Luther embraced, Ulrich Zwingli began to preach from the New Testament regularly. In 1519, the city of Zurich was struck by an epidemic that killed more than 25% of the city's population. And at this time, Zwingli was very faithful in carrying out his pastoral duties. And so part of that was visiting the sick and the dying. And so because he was visiting the sick and the dying, he caught this disease and he very nearly died himself. Thankfully, he pulled through and he recovered from his illness. Eventually, Zwingli convinced the Zurich City Council to support his teachings. So let's look at what Zwingli's teachings were. Now, Martin Luther said that anything that is not forbidden by the Bible is permissible. So because Martin Luther took this approach, he allowed some of the practices that were common in the Catholic Church to continue to be practiced in the Lutheran Church. Ulrich Zwingli took a different approach. He said that anything that is not clearly permitted by the Bible is forbidden. And so because of that, he did not practice certain practices that were common in the Catholic Church. For example, Zwingli began preaching against fasting during Lent, because this was a very common practice in the Catholic Church. During Lent, Catholics would often fast to prepare themselves for the coming of Easter. Now, so Zwingli preached against fasting during Lent, and some of Zwingli's parishioners responded by eating cooked sausage during Lent in the spring of 1522. And this event is considered by many to be the actual beginning of the Swiss Reformation. Zwingli also preached against celibacy. He thought that it was not necessary for priests to be celibate. And so in 1522, he secretly got married to Anna Reinhardt. And then 2 years later, he and Anna had a public wedding. And by all accounts, they had a good marriage. Zwingli also persuaded the Zurich City Council to abolish Mass. That is, he persuaded them to abolish celebrating Holy Communion at every church service. Okay, because that's what Mass is. That's what makes Mass Mass, is the celebration of Holy Communion. Zwingli also persuaded the Zurich City Council to remove religious images from churches in Zurich. And so statues of Mary were taken down, other religious paintings and other religious artwork was taken down from churches throughout Zurich. And this was because Zwingli believed that this promoted idolatry. And this is similar to the iconoclastic controversy that we talked about during our lesson on the Orthodox Church in the Byzantine Empire. Zurich also forbade music in his worship services. And this is despite the fact that the Old Testament and the New Testament encourages believers to make music to the Lord. The reason why Zwingli forbade music in his churches was because he wanted to prevent any distraction from people paying attention to the word, to the proclamation of the word of God. Now, Ulrich Zwingli and Martin Luther met in Marburg in 1529 in an attempt to unite the German and Swiss Reform movements. This gathering is known as the Marburg Colloquy. Now, here's the thing, they agreed on just about everything except for one doctrine, and that was the doctrine of the Lord's Supper. Luther believed that the elements contained the literal presence of Christ. He believed in the real presence of Christ, consubstantiation, while Zwingli believed that the elements are only symbols of Christ's reality. And unfortunately, because of this disagreement on the Lord's Supper, the Swiss and German Reform movements never did become united. And so they remain separate movements. Now, Zwingli's teachings led to a split in Switzerland between Protestants and Catholics. Some cities and cantons in Switzerland joined Zwingli and became Protestant, while others remained Catholic. And these cities and cantons actually began to have increasing conflict with each other, increasing friction. And this conflict, this division became ever more polarizing and eventually led to civil war within Switzerland. So in October of 1531, 5 Catholic cantons launched a surprise attack on Zurich. The defenders of Zurich had little time to prepare for battle, and many Protestant pastors joined the soldiers going out to fight the Catholic attack, including Ulrich Zwingli. The battle lasted barely an hour, and Zwingli was wounded. Zwingli was later killed by an enemy captain who found him. And so we see that Ulrich Zwingli was not a pacifist, even though he came to the conviction that mercenaries fighting in foreign wars was wrong. He still believed he was still a committed Swiss patriot. And so he fought for his homeland. And in the end, he died trying to defend his city of Zurich. And so this brings Zwingli's life to an end. And this brings our lecture on the Swiss Reformation to an end. The next lecture covers the Radical Reformation. So please go on, So please stop this video and let's go on to look at the Radical Reformation.